Alright, so we're back with the coupler drawing, and what we're going to do now is create an assembly from this part, and we're actually going to use two of the couplers. So this will be the same part used twice, and we're going to create this part 2 in here, the connector piece. We're going to create it within the assembly. So we're going to make these two coupler pieces and then create this part within the assembly. So the way that we're going to do that, we're going to take what we have, the coupler drawing. We need to make sure that we saved it. I just put coupler part number 2. You can be a little more specific. You can put your initials beside it, that kind of thing. But we're going to go to the File pull-down menu, and if your File pull-down menu is not pinned out, it's very easy to click on the thumbtack here and pin it. So File pull-down menu, and we're going to do Make Assembly from Part. Okay, and when it does that, it's going to take you through making the assembly. I already have the assembly up, so I'm just going to close this out. So I have two assemblies here. The coupler assembly that is similar to the one that you just made, where it brought the coupler in, and then I have one that's already created. And I am going to explode this view so you can kind of see it. And what I want you to look at as we go through this is the mates. Okay, we have a coincident mate between those two parts, a concentric mates between the circular part of it, and then another concentric mate, and then we have an angle because this needs to come in at an angle. We have a coincident on the other side, another concentric, and then we have another angle dimension, or another angle mate there. So the way we're going to draw this, it's not going to be exactly like what we see here because we're going to create this part within the assembly, but we do need to bring in two coupler drawings and then put an angle mate on those so we can actually mate those up. This particular mate, if we look at it, that's a 90-degree angle, so in order for those to meet up, we have to put a 90-degree angle from the two matching planes. So that's going to be the first thing that we do, is bring in another of the same part and then put a mate on it. And then we'll generate this tooth based on the teeth from the part that we already have created. Okay? So in this mate, and I'm going to expand so we can see it, we're going to go up here to Insert Components, and we're going to choose the coupler, and I don't have it up, so I have to find it. You probably already have it up, especially if you have already brought it into the assembly and you already had it modeled and you still have the solid model file up, then you won't have to search for it. Now, when you have an assembly, you can have a way to turn this as it comes in. This makes it a whole lot easier. SOLIDWORKS didn't always have this feature, but in order for that feature to be showing, it has to have show the rotate context bar checked right here when you bring it in. We do know that this part needs to be rotated, and you can always look at your XYZ UCS coordinate down here, the origin, to see where it needs to be rotated about. We're going to rotate this 90 degrees. Actually, we'll do 180 degrees about the Y, and that way it is facing the other direction. Now, what would happen here if we forgot to do that? You know, say that you already dropped it in there, you forgot to do that. We can actually come up here under Move Component and rotate a component. And if you have to do it this way, make sure don't free drag anything, because when you free drag it, it's not accurate. But you can do by delta y XYZ, and you can move it here as well. So it's the same thing. So we really don't want to rotate it. If you need to rotate it, you can that way. And what we need to do first is do that angle dimension, so when these are mated together, it's going to do what it's supposed to do. So if we take the top plane of the first one, and anything that you bring in, I really didn't talk about this a lot, but when you drop the first component in, it is very important that you come over here before you drop the first component in and turn on the origin, because you want the part origin to be the same as the assembly origin. So that's something that I should have said to you before whenever we created the assembly. But when you go into assemblies, very important, and this is also on the SolidWorks certification exam, you want to view the origins if they're not already on and drop the part at the assembly origin. That way the first part that you bring in will have the same origin as the assembly origin. And very important, because whenever you're starting to make parts together, or say you need a distance or something of that nature, then it's going to share the same origin and the same planes. So if you didn't do that, that's okay on this one, because this is the first assembly that we've done, but you'll want to remember that in the future. So I'm going to take the top plane, and I'm going to take the top plane of this coupler. So if I'm just expanding these out, I'm using the planes from the design tree, and I'm holding down Control or Shift. Actually, Control is better in this case because Shift will select everything. So I'm holding down Control, and I want those planes to be at 90 degrees from one another. So I can see both of them are in line, and I want to come up here and click on Mate. Now I could have clicked on Mate first, but I didn't. If you click on Mate first, then you can choose the planes the same way. You can expand out your feature tree here. If you click on that little arrow, it expands your feature tree out, so you have the opportunity to select them in the feature tree again. It also comes up with this little heads-up toolbar that you can choose some of just your simpler mates in it. We're going to do an angle, so I'm going to click over here and do this angle, and I'm going to put 90 degrees there, so it rotates the 90 degrees, and then we're going to check that off. So now when we mate these up, it's going to have that 90 degree angle, and it's going to come in like it's supposed to. Now if we rotate it, we see, yes indeed, they're at 90 degrees, those planes are, but we're still not mated like we need to be. If you see it from the side, you see they're not lined up. So here's where we're going to do a concentric mate. I'm going to select the surface and not the edge. If you see the little square come up, that means we're selecting the surface. If you see a line come up, that means you're selecting the edge. We don't want to do edges, because edges work a little bit different, because they can be tangent, which can make the part rotate in a direction we don't want it to rotate. But if we do the whole edge, then it brings up that, or if we do the whole face, it brings up the whole face, and it keeps it where it needs to be. So we're going to do those two faces, and it's pretty intuitive. It knows that there are two cylindrical faces, so we'll make those concentric, and we'll check that off. Now we're in line, but we're still not fully mated. So we need to do a mate where we mate the surfaces. So I'm going to click on this surface and this surface. So I'm just rotating with my wheel, and I'm going to check that off. Okay, and that should have worked, but we see that maybe our angle is off just a little bit, because this is actually supposed to be in the middle. So if we pop back over to the example assembly here, we can see that indeed this is supposed to be in the middle. So here's where we can see where we're off. So instead of doing 90, we need to look at that, and it's probably going to be something like 30 or 60. And we can check it. We can even come in here and say, okay, the top plane and that coupler part, and then the top plane and this coupler part. If we look at the mate or evaluate, we could have used the evaluate tool, but we can see that that's actually 60-degree angle instead of a 90-degree angle. So we need to make room for the second part in here. So easy enough to change. We can come in our mates. Mates are seen two different places. We're going to see the mates within the part itself under the mates folder. And then down here in the assembly at the end of the design tree, we see the mates there as well. So we just simply want to right click and choose edit feature. And instead of 90, we're going to put 60 as our angle. And that should help us out there, get us where we need to be. And we can see that indeed that looks correct. We're at the right angle now, and we have all of our mates for those two parts created. Now if we needed to update the part, let's say that we had a drawing that was wrong, and sometimes that happens, and sometimes we have to go back in the drawing and edit it. So if I wanted to edit this part, I could click on the part, and I could come up here to edit component. And what that allows me to do is come in here and actually, I'm actually working on the part without opening it. So if I needed to edit my sketch, this was the very first sketch that we did, I could edit that sketch. If I needed to do an edit on the angle tooth, I could come in here and edit the sketch for my angle tooth. And I could see, you know, how I did that sketch. So we don't really need to edit the part. So to get out of edit component, you can simply click on the little icon up here in the corner, or you can uncheck edit component up in the upper left. So now we're going to create the middle part, the spacer here, and we're going to do that straight from the assembly. So where it says insert components here, we're going to use the insert components, but we're going to hit on the little arrow and choose new part instead of insert components, because we haven't created this component yet. And of course I did this a little bit differently in my example, but you know, here we'll go ahead and minimize that other screen, and that way we can have a full screen on this one. Select the things I was supposed to select. So you'll come down here and you'll hit the little arrow and you'll go new part, and then it wants you to click on a surface to start that part. So I'm just going to click on this common surface in here, this inside surface, to put my part on. And all that does is tells us that, okay, that's the front plane of that part. Okay, so we chose that as our front plane, and now it's letting me edit that part. If you right click and choose rename part, you can do that. Now if rename part is not available when you right click, what you're going to have to do is come up here to options. You're going to go down to feature manager, and you're going to have to check allow component files to be renamed from the feature manager tree. So if we don't have that, then it's not going to allow us to rename it. So you may have to come into options, feature manager, and allow components to be renamed. So you might have to check that. I'm just going to call this, I'm going to rename it and just call it The other one I had named Kepler Part 2. We could name this Kepler Part 1 if we wanted to. Maybe Spacer. Okay, so we've renamed it. I was just showing you how to do that. Not super important, just for the simplest assembly, but it is very important whenever you're talking about keeping track of all your files. So a good idea to go ahead and do that. And then it already puts us in a sketch. So the way this is going to work, and I know this is very hard to see, so sometimes it's much easier, and you can actually utilize the components that's in the assembly by going to Hidden Lines Visible mode. Okay, so now we know that we're in a sketch. We know that sketch is on our front view. I'm going to go to Normal 2, and I'm going to select some of these lines just by clicking on them and holding down Control. And what happens when I do that, I can convert this entire sketch. I can click on Convert Entities. And make that into my sketch. So it's basically making that spacer, that gear-like part that's in the middle, it's going to make that for us. Okay, now if we look at the drawing, if we look at this drawing by itself, we can see our dimensions here, and we know that there's no hole or anything in it. It's only the hole in the keyway in the outside, the actual coupling. And then we put this together, and this would be something like on the end of a shaft and a motor to make those two shafts together, and one would turn and make the other turn at the same time. So something like maybe on a milling machine or a bed of a 3D printer, to where the motor was turning at the same time as the shaft to move something. So that would be an application here. But for us to just look at the sketch that we're creating, basically the outline that we have is complete. So we would toggle back over here, and we do have to do a little bit of trimming because we don't want the extra line here. So we're going to click on Trim and just trim out where we would not need. Oops, trim too much there. So if you trim too much, you can come in and sometimes it's easier to rotate and see it, especially in an assembly file. So I'm only trimming at the parts, and I can also, like, if I don't want this part to show, I can right click. It may not let me do it while I'm in a sketch, but I could choose to suppress this part or hide it for a moment, and that way it's not showing. So change the transparency just makes it clear. That doesn't help us a lot, but I could also hide or show the component. So I'm choosing to hide it, so it looks like it takes it away from now, but it doesn't really. And I can see that it does look like I still have more to trim here. And I guess that's just part of the object. So I can see that everything is good. I'm going to check that off. And now I can extrude. Now I need to get back that part that I just hid. So in order to get it back, you'll just come over here and uncheck it. And so I want both of those to show. And the reason why I want that to show is because whenever I choose the extrude command on this, if I click on features and go to extrude, because I'm still in that sketch, I'm going to choose the sketch to extrude, but I'm going to tell it to extrude up to a surface. So instead of going blind, I'm going to say up to surface, and I'm going to click on the opposite surface that it needs to go up to, and I'm going to check that off. So now I'm pretty much done with that component, but let's change our view here. I can see that it's indeed in there and it looks like what it's supposed to. And as soon as I check off edit that component, all of it shows. Now this one, remember I changed the transparency on it, so I can right click and choose to change that back. Okay, but if you're in an assembly and you need to see inside somewhere that you can't see, you can either hide the component or you can change the transparency. So if I hide it, I have to come over here in the feature tree to show it again, but I can also change the transparency and make it clear so I can see through it. Different ways that you can do those things. You can also change it to show just the outline or with hidden lines visible. So lots of things that we can do there. So now we have this coupling, and to finish off our assembly, I'm going to go ahead and just go to a zoom isometric. So this is what it would look like in an isometric. Maybe that's not quite showing it enough, so maybe a trimetric view might be a little bit better for us, and you can still just barely see that back component. So maybe just rotating it a little bit so we can see all three components. And we're going to do an explode view. Okay, so I'm going to get all of my feature tree up here. So in an exploded view, what happens with the exploded view is you want to make sure that you're not clicking in and out of it 3 or 4 times, because then you create 3 or 4 exploded views. So we're going to click on exploded view, and every time you do an explode step, you're going to hit done right here where it says add step. That will turn into a done. And so just make sure you're not, if for some reason you click out of it, don't click this again, because then it's 2 different exploded views instead of the same exploded view. So what an explode view does, it allows us to click on the first object we want to move, and this helps us to see how these parts are mated together. And you can freehand drag it out, but you can also put some distances in here if you want to. You can put an angle on the explode, however you want to pull that part away from the assembly. And then here's where I was talking about the done. If I want to go ahead and go to another part, then I need to click done here. And then I can click on my next part, pull it out, kind of give it some room to where we can see all of this back part, and then I can hit done as well. Now if I wanted to go back and change this and say, okay, I didn't pull this part out far enough, then the way I would do that is to come up here and change it by clicking on it here, and you can see that it puts the arrow back on it. And then if I wanted to change step 2, I could change it here. Now since we don't really need to move the third part, this is all that we need to do. We're going to check out of the explode. Now if we were to hit, let's say that we did want to change it, and we hit this again, what that's going to do is make another exploded view. The way that you can edit your exploded view after you get out of it is come over here to the configuration manager and expand out where it says default. And we actually have, I had an original exploded view because I saved this off of another a finished assembly that I already did. So that one's grayed out. It's not going to let me get into that one because it's connected to my previous assembly. You won't have that one. You'll just have the exploded view 1 showing up. But that is the explode. This is how you would come back in and edit it if you wanted to. You would right click, here and edit feature, and then it takes you back into this explode. So we don't really need to edit it unless you got out of it too quickly. But the way to get back to your regular feature tree is to click on this feature manager icon. And then you can do several different things. If you come up here and right click where it says coupler assembly, then you can hit collapse and it shows it collapse. You can animate the explode where it shows you how it's coming out, how it works. You'll have a toolbar that comes up. Mine, for some reason, in the installation, it would not come up. But yours will probably come up here in the upper left, and you can loop that explode and do all kinds of things. So that is how you create a part from an assembly, create a part right inside the assembly based on the measurements of your other part. We didn't have to put any mates on this middle part. Now if we created it separate, then we would bring it in just like we brought in the other components, and we would have to mate it just like we mated the other components. But you can create parts right from the assembly.